Apple's next boundary-pushing iPhone port is finally here. Remedy's 2019 hit Control has made its way to Apple devices, including recent iPhones, iPads, and Macs. Plus, it comes with a suite of PC ray tracing features, MetalFX Upscaling, and MetalFX frame interpolation. So is this another class-leading mobile port, or is Control better experienced on home platforms?
This video is sponsored by MSI. To mark the launch of Diablo 4 and the new Lord of Hatred expansion, MSI is launching a new giveaway featuring a one-of-a-kind custom PC. The grand prize is based on MSI's AG series of gaming desktops. This Diablo-themed system is a bespoke design built especially for this campaign, meaning it's entirely exclusive and will not be made available anywhere else. In addition to the custom AG's desktop, the prize pool also includes a secondary tier of rewards, with MSI giving away 100 digital game codes for Diablo 4 Lord of Hatred. The entry process is straightforward, and there are several ways to increase your chances of winning. By completing specific activities on the giveaway page, you can earn additional entries into the draw. Hit the link in the video description below to find the official page and read through the full requirements. Diablo 4 Lord of Hatred is available to play right now.
Control is an interesting experience on iPhone. For better or for worse, we're getting a full settings menu here, with configurable options for LODs, textures, shadows, volumetric lighting, foliage, SSAO, and reflections, plus output resolution, upscaling, and frame interpolation, Apple's more straightforward term for its MetalFX frame generation technology. But it's not quite as flexible as you might think. The game's internal frame rate is capped at 30 FPS, so no combination of settings will allow you to hit high frame rates, unless you want to use frame interpolation to effectively double the game's apparent fluidity. And resolutions notionally cap out at a whopping 6 megapixels, which is a similar pixel count to 1800p on a 16:9 display. But in practice, the game seems to be capped around the resolution of the iPhone's panel, which offers slightly above 3 megapixels of resolution. As far as I can tell, the various upscaling parameters seem to behave as expected. A 2.0 resolution scale seems to imply performance level upscaling, 1.5 translates to quality level upscaling, and 1.0 hits a full native res. The game's default 2 megapixel output means around a 950p target for MetalFX to hit, while 3 megapixels means around 1170p. These vary slightly depending on the resolution scale. There are a lot of settings permutations here, so I thought I'd simplify things a bit by focusing on the default for this device configuration, with a few tweaks here and there. This offers a mix of low and medium settings that in practice delivers good visual quality with all the key features of the game sans ray tracing. Compared to the game's PS4 release, we're finding general parity in visual features. We get screen space and SDF-based reflections, good-looking real-time shadows, and pleasing volumetrics, with the game's visual signature very much intact. In the past, we've typically seen more obvious settings downgrades compared to last-gen console on iPhones, but the newest 17 Pro devices are quite capable and seem more able to meet the last-gen console standard. MetalFX does a good enough job here, but it isn't a miracle worker, and the game is prone to bouts of specular aliasing and other visual breakup, at least running with default settings. The PS4 is comparatively clean, operating with a drastically higher resolution. But in practice, the iPhone's smaller display tends to mask these flaws, so faults aren't as plain as they are in these comparisons. Frame rates are typically quite good on the iPhone. Sans frame interpolation, we're targeting 30 FPS, and we generally hit that target. One-off drop frames do pop up sometimes, at least in my capture here, but they aren't too disruptive. To get the most accurate frame rate readings from the iPhone, I am capturing the device at 60Hz output, but the game seems to hit similar performance at 120Hz on the phone's built-in display. I did experience a few crashes early on in my time playing the game, but once I upgraded to iOS 26.4.2 from iOS 26.2, they seemed to disappear. It's possible this is just coincidence, but I would suggest players upgrade to the latest operating system available before playing Control or other high-end iPhone games. Compared to PS4, iPhone is a bit of a revelation. PS4 suffers from momentary frame rate dives, which can take the game into the teens during intense combat. Some combination of the iPhone's dramatically faster CPU and storage likely help to avoid similar problems. Raw GPU grunt might not be anything to write home about even on the latest iPhones, but modern iPhones have much more capable hardware than PS4 in many other respects. For a more fluid run of play, we can engage frame interpolation. This is the first time I've reviewed a game on iPhone that makes use of frame interpolation, which is a relatively new addition to the MetalFX suite. Unfortunately, the results aren't amazing here. Frame interpolation quality is generally fun enough, but there are some presentation issues at times, where it appears a generated frame is skipped, producing a brief, juddery camera motion. Latency feels similar to the game without FrameGen enabled, but I still don't love the way it feels in the hand. It's also not quite able to hit a stable 60 FPS, dropping frames frequently, especially during firefights. Fast camera travel provokes drops as well, where generated frames appear to drop out often. Sometimes developers will disengage frame generation momentarily to minimize visual errors, but I think this is the wrong approach, if that's indeed what Apple has done here. And in general, combining a 30 FPS internal update with FrameGen goes against common game industry practices. It's not as aberrant as a 15 FPS refresh, as is being suggested for the upcoming LEGO Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight, but it still produces an unsatisfactory result. Frame interpolation is enabled by default with the game's For This Device settings, which doesn't feel correct to me. Rasterized control on iPhone is pretty good, but its ray tracing takes the game to the next level. Nearly the entire suite of PC ray tracing features is available on my iPhone 17 Pro, including opaque reflections, transparent reflections, contact shadows, diffuse global illumination, and a toggle to enable debris to be included in the ray tracing. The PC setting to dial up ray tracing sample count is absent, but the game's core RT features are very much present. In practice, the ray traced reflections are easily the most notable upgrade. Viewed parallel to the reflective surface, we're getting a more extensive and more detailed replacement for the SDF tracing that is otherwise used. Monochromatic white smears are replaced with diffused, but detailed and colorful reflections on semi-glossy surfaces, while glass perfectly mirrors the scene. Control has pretty good SSR, I would say, but the ray tracing provides proper, perspective-correct specular detail that isn't subject to the usual screen space errors. Reflective objects are more convincingly grounded in the surrounding environment as well, like this trash can. The results from the ray trace diffuse lighting, which is a limited form of RTGI, are a bit more mixed. In these shots, the RTGI does improve the depth and directionality of the diffuse lighting, but pans back and forth in many environments reveal irritating breakup, a seeming consequence of enabling the RTGI. Apple does have a new machine learning based denoiser, which has been featured in the recent Mac version of Crimson Desert, but it hasn't made an appearance in this title. Higher internal resolutions are needed to resolve this cleanly without that technique, but we can't really spare the GPU time with ray tracing dialed up like this. RT contact shadows improve close range lighting fidelity on objects like this fire extinguisher, but they aren't very impactful in typical play. It's a nice addition to the game, but don't expect the kind of RT shadowy enhancements we've observed in games like Cyberpunk 2077, which trace a much broader range of shadows. With default settings, frame interpolation off, and all ray tracing dialed on, we unfortunately don't have a very good performance profile. We're at a wobbly 30 FPS update for a period traversing through this early area, and when we enter this large room, the game crashes. I tried to progress several times through this spot, and every time the game hanged and crashed, so I don't think this configuration is especially stable. But with the game's For This Device RT setting enabled, with no frame interpolation, which enables RT transparent and opaque reflections, we hit a much more regular 30 FPS update. I experienced one crash over my time playing in this configuration, but I didn't spot consistent issues with the game with these options enabled. There are occasional frame rate drops, and I'd probably prefer the raster-only configuration, but achieving a very playable ray traced AAA experience on a mobile phone is quite an accomplishment. Ray traced reflections do offer the game's most substantial RT lighting enhancements, so ditching the game's RT diffuse lighting and contact shadows seems like a perfectly fine concession for a stable run of play. Beyond the highest end iPhone, we do have a range of other hardware to test. My 2-year-old iPhone 15 Pro runs the game at a decent clip, with a reasonable 30 FPS update, occasionally marred by frame rate drops. The For This Device settings are a bit worse than their 17 Pro equivalents, notably for instance dropping the game's SDF reflections, which drastically degrades specular lighting quality, but they don't look too bad. A 480p to 960p MetalFX scale looks just fine on the device as well. This feels perfectly serviceable on the much weaker 15 Pro, though framerate drops annoy and the ray tracing features can't be enabled at all. Apple's iPad Air M2, seen here in its massive 13-inch configuration, works fine as well. The default config aims a bit higher than the 15 Pro, though SDF reflections are still disabled. MetalFX takes 748p to 1496p, which looks reasonable enough. Expect a quite consistent 30 FPS update, sans some drops in especially heavy scenes. Even though this iPad has a relatively old processor, I'd still expect overall rendering grunt in line with the 17 Pro, owing to its large GPU configuration with a much wider memory bus. Unfortunately, RT isn't supported here, as the system only has 8GB of RAM, and a GPU that doesn't support hardware RT in the first place. The new M5 iPad Pro is a cut above. The default RT configuration here turns on medium ray tracing. One downside though, the game drops to a 0.333 repeating resolution scale, or ultra performance in DLSS parlance, giving the game a 552p internal res at a 1656p output. This means image quality that's a bit shakier than I'd like, although it usually looks fine enough on the iPad's panel. Frame rates are solid with a few dips and a quite consistent 30 FPS update. I'd be curious to see a 60 FPS or maybe a 40 FPS targeting configuration in this device, as I really think higher native frame rates should be achievable. Switching to Mac, the 2024 MacBook Pro with M4 Max should represent a dramatically better tier of performance, with graphics grunts similar to mid-range laptop GPUs. I aimed pretty high here with my chosen settings to start. A 4K output with MetalFX at 1080p internal, high settings, and medium ray tracing. This configuration worked well in smaller scale environments, but larger shootouts dropped frames more often than I was comfortable with. Dropping RT brings us much closer to a locked 60 frames per second, with occasional minor dips. I think this configuration compares favorably to PS5 and Series X, which have higher internal resolutions at 60 FPS, but worse image quality owing to poor AA treatment. And of course on the MacBook Pro screen itself, lower resolutions are more sensible and the panel supports VRR, so slightly heavier settings will probably work out alright. Control is probably the most ambitious AAA porting effort we've seen on iPhone to date. Meaningful RT effects, plus MetalFX running on a visually sophisticated cross-gen game, make for a pretty compelling visual experience. Stability is slightly questionable, especially with all the visual bells and whistles toggled on, but it's a solid experience for a handheld device. Even the iPhone 15 Pro, the weakest hardware this game supports, is perfectly playable and still looks good. Higher-end iPads and Macs mean ever more stable visuals with better ray tracing, but the experience on iPhone is quite unique among mobile phones. Plus, it's available on iPhones and iPads for just $5 US for the full game, which feels like a steal. There's very little risk in trying this one out, and it's a great advertisement for the capabilities of Apple devices. So the latest big budget Apple port isn't perfect, but it does push out the rendering frontier on portable devices. AAA gaming on phones has never looked so good. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. Check out the Patreon at patreon.com/digitalfoundry for exclusive and early access content and to get in touch through social media.